Evening settles over the Shire with a soft sigh. I am Bilbo Baggins, and on this quiet bench, I feel the weight of untold stories. A young friend sits beside me, his eyes full of questions about our home. The gentle breeze seems to carry whispers from long ago, tales of resilience and hidden wonders that built this peaceful land. By the end of our time together, you will know the secret history of the Shire and the quiet strength that keeps it safe. I wonder where in the world you are listening from right now, and what the hour feels like where you are. We hobbits cherish our comfort, but our past holds moments of great courage and difficult choices. What was the price paid for our enduring peace, and what forgotten guardians watch over our borders? What does true safety mean to you? That river crossing was a leap of faith into the unknown. With Marcho and Blanco at their head, our ancestors forded the swift currents of the Brandywine, leaving behind the uncertainties of their wandering lives. They did not find a ready-made paradise. The land before them was wild, tangled with ancient roots and tall grasses that had never known a plow. Their first task was to carve a home from the wilderness itself, their hands raw from felling trees and turning the hard earth. The first smiles they dug were humble, little more than pockets in the hillside, but they were ours. Each scoop of earth was a promise, a declaration that the hobbits had finally come to stay. This back-breaking labor forged the very soil of the Shire, but it came at a great cost. Their supplies, carefully hoarded for the journey, dwindled rapidly. The unity that had carried them across the river was tested by short tempers and aching muscles as the sheer scale of their task became clear. And always, just beyond the newly cleared fields, lay the brooding presence of the old forest. Its trees seemed to watch in a deep, unnerving silence, their leaves whispering secrets in the wind. Some hobbits spoke of feeling unseen eyes upon them, a sensation that made the hair on their feet stand on end. It was Marcho who steadied their nerves. He walked the new furrows each evening, placing his hand upon the cool soil and speaking of the land's gentle heart. He saw not an adversary in the wild, but a partner waiting to be understood. He urged his people to look past their fear and their weariness, to see the future bounty in the stubborn ground. The stakes could not have been higher. To falter now meant a retreat into rootless wandering, the loss of this fragile dream before it could truly take root. But to succeed meant creating a sanctuary that would echo through the ages. When the first golden harvest was finally brought in, filling their larders and their hearts with a profound relief, a new kind of whisper traveled through the Hobbiton market. The immediate struggle for survival was over, but a different question now lingered in the smoke rings rising from their pipe weed. If this land was so generous, what other powers might be sleeping within its borders? That golden harvest was more than just food. It was a statement, word of our success, of this little nation of farmers carving a home from the wild, eventually reached the ears of the king in the north. We had not asked for permission to settle, but we had earned his respect. The day the royal messenger arrived was one of hushed awe. He carried a scroll, a formal charter from the King of Arnor himself, granting the land to the hobbits in perpetuity. It was a gift, an acknowledgement that the Shire was ours, but with that gift came a profound question. How would we rule ourselves? The celebration that night was tempered by a new and weighty responsibility. We were truly independent now, and the burden of self-rule settled upon our shoulders. Not everyone saw this independence in the same light. A deep divide opened among our people. Some, their memories of a harsh world beyond the Brandywine still fresh, argued for turning inward. They feared that any connection to the outside, any trade or travel, would bring the very perils they had fled. Others, led by a forward-thinking hobbit named Gordon, saw a different path. He spoke of the tools and knowledge we could gain through careful trade, of the strength that comes from understanding our neighbors without being ruled by them. The debates were heated, filling the inns with passionate voices and the scent of anxious pipe smoke. The risk was a deep internal division, a splintering of our community, just as it was finding its feet. It fell to our first Tyne, an elder elected by popular consent for his steady hand and good heart, to find a way forward. He listened to the fears and the hopes, and he made a decision that would define us for centuries. He would not build walls. Instead, he created the Shire Moot, a gathering of representatives from every corner of our land. This council was not a place for ambitious leaders, but for sensible hobbits to air grievances, settle boundary disputes over a pint, and ensure that no one, no matter how small their farm, was without a voice. It was a system built on common sense and a shared love of peace. The law of the land became simply this: respect your neighbor and tend your garden. With a gentle system of governance in place, a collective sigh of relief seemed to pass through the hills. The hobbits turned their full attention to the soil, to the art of cultivation and comfort. They planted orchards that would one day groan with apples, and perfected the craft of brewing that would make the ivy bush infamous. They believed their great challenges were behind them, that their peace was a permanent and settled thing. They could not know that the land itself held one last, quiet secret, a deeper magic sleeping in the earth that would one day be needed to protect everything they had built. The warmth of that golden era was not to last. A winter came that was unlike any before, a season of deep and bitter white that seemed to swallow the sun itself. The Brandywine River froze solid, and snowdrifts piled higher than a hobbit's round front door. In the face of such a relentless chill, the comfortable routines of life shattered. Pantries that had been full in autumn grew thin, and the cheerful fires in every hearth became a desperate defense against the cold. It was in this time of hardship that the true character of the Shire was tested. Shortages forced difficult conversations in every smile. How could they fairly divide the last sacks of flour, the final stores of potatoes? Some voices, sharp with fear, argued for looking after their own families first. Whispers of leaving, of abandoning the frozen fields for easier lands to the south, began to circulate in the grim silence. The risk was not just hunger, but a fracture in the very community they had built. Then, Farmer Maggot made a choice that would echo through the annals of our history. He was known as a stubborn hobbit, fiercely protective of his land and his prized vegetables. Yet one morning, he trudged through the deep snow to the center of Hobbiton and declared his root cellars open to all. It was not an easy decision for him, but he saw that hoarding would only deepen the collective suffering. His act of generosity became a beacon. Soon, the great families, the Tooks and the Brandybucks, began organizing communal stores and opening their large smiles as shelters for those whose own homes were buried or too cold. The long winter taught us a brutal but vital lesson. Our safety was not found in the thickest walls or the fullest private larder, but in the shared strength of our neighbors. We learned that resilience is a communal craft, woven from countless small acts of kindness. There was loss, of course, a quiet sorrow that settled in the hearts of those who said farewell to loved ones. That sorrow forged a deeper bond among those who remained, a profound and unshakable appreciation for the home they had nearly lost. When the thaw finally arrived, it felt like a rebirth. The hobbits emerged from their smiles, blinking in the bright sun, to a world that was both familiar and changed. The landscape was scarred, and many beloved trees and fields had been lost to the ice. But a new resolve had taken root in their hearts. They set to work not just rebuilding what was gone, but tending to their land with a fiercer, more grateful love. They had faced the abyss together, and in doing so, they discovered that the deepest magic in the Shire was not in the soil itself, but in the spirit of its people. The memory of that harsh winter was still fresh in their minds when the first warm breezes of spring whispered through the valley. With a newfound sense of purpose, the hobbits turned their hands to a great shared endeavor, the building of a proper village. They would call it Hobbiton. It began not with a grand plan, but with a simple, shared need for a central place to meet, to trade, and to simply be together. The first challenge was the very earth itself. Where should the first smiles be dug? Some families favored the sunny southern slopes for their warmth, while others argued for the more sheltered northern hillsides. The debate grew so heated that for a few days, the only sound in the evening air was the stubborn silence between neighbors. It was then that an old gardener, known to everyone simply as the Gaffer, decided to act. He took a single, vibrant sapling and planted it right in the middle of the most contested, open field. He did not ask for permission. He simply started digging. This, he declared to anyone who would listen, would be the party tree. It would be a place for everyone, a spot for celebrations that belonged to no single family, but to the community itself. His quiet, decisive act broke the tension. It was a reminder that they were building a home, not just a collection of individual houses. One by one, hobbits brought their tools and their talents to the field. The diggers, masters of earth and slope, began crafting the first smiles, their round doors facing the fledgling tree. The carpenters fitted the fine wooden frames, and the gardeners immediately began laying turf on the new roofs, ensuring each home was nestled back into the hill as if it had always been there. Hobbiton rose from the ground not as a project of a single mind, but as a tapestry woven from many different threads. Each family contributed their unique skill, and in doing so, they left their own signature on the village. A disagreement over the exact curve of a doorway was settled not with argument, but with a practical demonstration of two different designs, letting the community see which one felt more right. The stakes for this cooperation were immense. A well-built, harmonious Hobbiton would be the strong, beating heart of the Shire for generations to come. A village born from discord, however, would be a constant source of inefficiency and lingering resentment. They were building more than just walls and gardens. They were building their future. As the last round green door was hung, and the first cheerful smoke curled from a new chimney, Hobbiton stood complete. It was a masterpiece of cozy practicality, a symbol of what could be achieved when many hands worked with a single shared heart. With their central village now thriving, a new thought began to occupy the minds of the more adventurous hobbits. How would they connect their beloved Hobbiton to the quiet, far-flung corners of the Shire, where distant cousins were already settling into their own isolated smiles? A simple footpath would no longer serve the sprawling Shire. The need for a proper road became as clear as the need for a good harvest. It began with a shared vision, a desire to connect Hobbiton to the far corners of the four Farthings, so that a hobbit from Tuckborough could safely visit his cousins in Buckland without a week-long trek through rough country. The project was immense, a ribbon of stone and packed earth that would stretch across the heart of their land. Volunteers arrived with shovels and wheelbarrows, their spirits high as they cleared underbrush and leveled the ground. The sound of cheerful labor, of hammers on stone, and the rumble of filled carts became the new music of the Shire. This was more than just construction. It was the physical weaving together of their community. With every mile completed, commerce began to blossom. A farmer from the Marish could now bring his prize pumpkins to the Hobbiton market in a single day, and news from the East Farthing no longer took a month to become common knowledge. The road became a river of life, carrying not just goods, but stories, recipes, and new friendships. Yet this progress was not welcomed by all. Some landowners, particularly those with large, quiet estates along the proposed route, viewed the road with deep suspicion. They saw not a ribbon of connection, but a gash of intrusion. They feared the constant traffic past their smiles would disrupt their peace, that the privacy of their gardens would be lost to the curious eyes of passing carters. A few even refused to grant right-of-way, standing with folded arms before surveyors, their faces set in stubborn lines. The project threatened to stall, fractured by these pockets of resistance. The unity they had built with such care was being tested by the very thing meant to strengthen it. It was the mayor of the time, a patient hobbit named Whitfoot, who stepped into the fray. He did not command or threaten. Instead, he visited each resistant landowner, sitting at their kitchen tables with a pipe and a listening ear. He acknowledged their fears as valid, and then he spoke of the greater good. He negotiated not with force, but with fairness, offering fair compensation for the land used and promising that the road would be built with respect, curving gently to spare ancient trees and quiet groves wherever possible. He helped them see that the road did not have to be a boundary, but a bridge. His gentle diplomacy turned opposition into agreement, and the project moved forward, stronger for having addressed the concerns of every voice. The stakes of this endeavor were quietly profound. Without this road, the Shire would have remained a collection of isolated villages, each growing inward and apart. In a time of crisis, help would arrive too slowly, and news of danger might not come at all. With the road, they gained a new kind of strength, the strength of swift connection. They were no longer just neighbors, they were a united people. As the first heavily laden carts began their steady roll along the finished stone, a new sound joined the familiar rustle of leaves and the flow of water. It was the sound of wheels turning, carrying not just produce, but the future itself. And with those carts came something else, whispers from beyond the Brandywine, tales of strange travelers on the road, and of distant lands that now felt a little bit closer. The first grand celebration beneath the party tree was a sight to behold. Long tables groaned under the weight of the feast. The Took family's fireworks stood ready for their dazzling display. and the air itself seemed to hum with music and laughter. This was more than a party. It was the Shire's heart, beating in joyous rhythm, a declaration of the community they had built with their own hands. Then the sky darkened. A sudden, fierce wind swept across the field, whipping tablecloths into the air and spattering the first heavy drops of rain. The music faltered. Laughter turned to shouts of alarm as the storm threatened to wash away their hard-won merriment. For a terrible moment, it seemed the entire celebration would be lost to the downpour, a disaster that could cast a long shadow over their fragile morale. It was then that Bilbo's own ancestor, a quick-thinking hobbit named Bungo Baggins, made a decision that would become family legend. He saw the panic on the faces of his friends and neighbors and refused to let the storm win. Raising his voice above the wind, he declared that the party would simply move. He threw open the round green door of his newly completed smile, Bag End, and ushered everyone inside. What followed was not a retreat, but a triumph of adaptation. The feast was squeezed into pantries and onto shelves. Musicians tucked themselves into cozy corners, and the crowded, warm smile soon echoed with a new, more intimate kind of joy. The Tooks, ever resourceful, set off their brilliant fireworks right from the hearth, painting the cozy ceiling with flashes of color that drew gasps of delight. That stormy evening forged a new tradition, one built not on perfect weather, but on shared resilience. The party was not just saved, it was transformed into something deeper. It proved that their spirit of fun was unbreakable, that community could turn a potential disaster into their fondest memory. In the warm, cheerful days that followed, a new energy seemed to flow through Hobbiton. The success of the improvised celebration inspired hobbits to pour their creative energy into new crafts. The gentle art of gardening blossomed into a passionate pursuit of new flower varieties. The need for more music at the next gathering saw a surge in fiddle making, and the desire for even better feasts encouraged new recipes for pies and pastries. The Shire was becoming a richer, more vibrant tapestry, its culture woven from countless threads of joyful invention. Yet the world beyond the Brandywine did not stay silent. Whispers began to arrive with traveling dwarves and the rare elf, tales of shifting shadows in the wider lands, and of folk displaced from their homes. A quiet unease settled over the evening discussions at the Ivy Bush Inn. Some hobbits dismissed these tales as distant troubles, nothing to do with the Shire. But others listened, their comfortable certainty beginning to fray at the edges. The question was no longer if they could remain isolated, but how they could protect the peace they had built. From this concern, a new idea was born, the Bounders. It began as a volunteer watch, a simple agreement that a few stout-hearted hobbits would walk the borders and keep their eyes open. They were not soldiers, but gardeners and farmers with a keen sense for when something in their land felt out of place. A brave and observant hobbit named Rowan Greenhand was the first to step forward and dedicate his life to this quiet duty. He became the first chief bounder, a title he wore with quiet humility. Not everyone approved. A vocal group argued passionately that the very act of watching for outsiders was an invitation for trouble. They believed true safety lay in complete obscurity, in making the Shire so quiet and forgettable that the larger world would simply pass it by. To post watchers, they argued, was to acknowledge the outside world in a way that betrayed their founding principles. The debate touched a deep nerve, pitting a desire for absolute seclusion against a new, pragmatic need for awareness. The stakes of this choice were profoundly simple. Without any vigilance, the Shire risked a rude and sudden awakening to dangers it was unprepared to face. With the Bounders walking their quiet patrols, they could maintain the cherished seclusion that defined their lives, but at the cost of always knowing, in the back of their minds, that a wider world of uncertainty existed just beyond the hedges. Rowan and his small band began their walks. At first, their reports spoke only of quiet woods and the familiar paths of fox and deer. But as the seasons turned, the chief bounder started to note subtler things. He spoke of a particular silence in a stretch of the old forest, a place where the birds no longer sang. He mentioned footprints near the Brandywine bridge that were too large to belong to any hobbit, and which vanished into the water as if they had never been. These were small things, easily explained away by the skeptical, yet for Rowan Greenhand, they were the first faint threads of a pattern, a quiet suggestion that the Shire was being watched in return. The whispers brought back by the Bounders settled like a morning mist over Buckland, clinging especially thick along the hedge that bordered the old forest. It was not long before a small band of curious brandybucks, led by a young hobbit named Marimas, felt an irresistible pull toward those dark trees. They told themselves it was a simple walk, a desire to see the strange silence for themselves. But the moment they stepped beyond the familiar boundary, the very air changed. The cheerful sounds of the Shire vanished, swallowed by a profound and watchful quiet. The trees here did not merely grow, they seemed to lean in, their gnarled branches intertwining like bony fingers. A path that seemed clear and straight one moment would, upon a second glance, appear to have twisted or vanished entirely, leaving them staring into a wall of thorny undergrowth. The only sounds were the creak of ancient wood and a low rustle that felt less like wind and more like whispered conversation, just at the edge of hearing. This was not a place that welcomed visitors. Marimas, his heart thumping a nervous rhythm against his ribs, made a decision. Turning back empty-handed felt like a failure, a surrender to the forest's intimidation. He would not challenge it, but he would seek to understand it. He decided to map the forest's edge, to document the strange behavior of the paths and the unsettling pockets of silence. It was an act of profound respect, an attempt to learn the rules of this ancient place without provoking its deeper wrath. His companions, however, felt the forest's resistance as a personal threat. Their cheerful hobbit curiosity began to curdle into a deep, primal unease. Every snapped twig sounded like a warning. Every shift of shadow seemed to hide a watching presence. The stakes of their quiet exploration became terrifyingly clear. To remain ignorant of the forest was to live next to a sleeping giant, never knowing what might wake it. But to delve too deep, to demand its secrets, was to risk drawing the attention of whatever ancient guardians slumbered within. They did not stay long. The forest's mood seemed to darken with their continued presence, the whispers growing more distinct, the paths more convoluted. When they finally stumbled back through the hedge into the blessed, ordinary light of the Shire, they brought with them more than just a few hastily sketched maps. They carried cautionary tales of a land that was truly alive, with a memory longer than their own and a will that was not hobbit-friendly. Their stories, shared in hushed tones at the Brandy Hall fireplace, rippled through the eastern settlements. The Shire, in response, began to turn its gaze inward. If such wonders and dangers existed on their very doorstep, what other hidden marvels lay within their own familiar borders? This new curiosity did not seek to conquer or change, but to appreciate and protect, fostering a deeper reverence for the subtle magic woven into their own hills and fields. The path along the water led them to a gentle, grassy bend, where the river seemed to slow and smile. It was a group of young friends, returning from a fishing trip with more tails than trout, who first saw the potential in that quiet spot. One of them, a hobbit named Barlaman, with a knack for hospitality, stood on the bank and declared it the perfect place for a proper inn. The dream was simple, a warm, welcoming hall where any hobbit could find good company, a hearty meal, and a pint of the finest ale. They called it the Green Dragon, after the mythical beast that adorned their favorite tavern sign from a tale they all knew. This would be more than a building. It would be a home for fellowship, a cradle for the stories that bind a community together. The project was embraced with immediate enthusiasm. Every hobbit could imagine the joy of such a place. But dreams, as they soon discovered, are one thing, and the timber and stone to build them are another. The initial excitement met the hard reality of cost. Their carefully pooled savings, a collection of coins from many pockets, was not enough to secure the quality of wood and glass they envisioned. Then a late spring flood swept away a vital delivery of foundation stone, setting them back by weeks. The cheerful volunteers, their own fields and gardens demanding attention, found their free time shrinking. The project slowed to a discouraging crawl, and for a time, it seemed the Green Dragon might remain just a lovely idea sketched in the dirt. The unity of the community was being tested not by a great crisis, but by the slow, grinding weight of practical hurdles. It was Barlaman who steadied the dream. He gathered the discouraged builders and made a pledge. They would use only local materials, even if it meant searching longer for the right trees. They would hire only Shire folk for the work, even if it took more time to find the right skills. This inn, he insisted, must be built by hobbits, for hobbits, from the very earth of the Shire itself. It was a decision that guaranteed more labor and delay, but it ensured the soul of the place would be true. The stakes of their endeavor were felt by everyone. A successful inn would weave a stronger social fabric, connecting the far-flung Farthings with threads of friendship and shared news. Its failure, however, would leave a hollow space in the heart of the Shire, a constant reminder of a dream they let slip away. So they persevered. Carpenters donated their off hours, farmers offered timber from their own woodlots, and gardeners planned the future flower boxes. The sound of hammers and saws became a persistent, hopeful rhythm by the water. The day the great hearth was lit for the first time, its flames catching the kindling with a soft whoosh, felt like a victory for the entire Shire. The light from its windows spilled out onto the river, a beacon of warmth and welcome, and the hobbits came. They traveled from Hobbiton and Tuckborough, from the Marish and Buckland, drawn by the promise of community. In the cozy, fire-lit common room, friendships were forged over pints of ale. News was shared from distant corners, and old legends were told and retold, their meanings shifting and deepening with each new listener. The cozy light of the Green Dragon could not keep every shadow from the Shire's borders, One crisp autumn, the news arrived not in a whisper, but a clamor. A band of goblins, fierce and numerous, had poured from the northern mountains and was pushing into the North Farthing, threatening the very farms that supplied the inn's larder. Panic, cold and sharp, began to spread faster than any fire. Many hobbits argued for hiding, for waiting for the outside world to save them, their courage faltering at the thought of facing such seasoned fighters. Defeat felt like a terrifying inevitability. It was in this moment of rising fear that Bandabras took, known to all as Bull Roarer for his powerful voice and his uncommon height, decided the Shire would save itself. He did not shout for war, but stood on a table at the ivy bush and declared, with a wry smile, that the goblins were trampling the best mushroom fields in the Shire, and that was simply unacceptable. His bold humor was a spark in the gloom. He rallied a band of volunteers, not by demanding bravery, but by appealing to their love of home and a good, clean fight. The stakes were as simple as they were dire. If they failed, the goblin incursion would become an invasion, bringing ruin to every smile and field. But if they could turn the tide, they would secure the Shire's safety, and more importantly, its pride, for generations. The two forces met at the Greenfields. The goblins were a snarling mass of iron and malice, outnumbering the hobbits greatly. Bull Roarer, riding a sturdy horse, seemed to be everywhere at once, his great club a whirlwind that cleared space around him. The battle raged, a chaotic clash against a foe that knew only conquest. In the pivotal moment, Bull Roarer found himself face to face with the goblin leader, a hulking brute named Gulfimbull. As the chieftain charged, Bull Roarer did not meet him with brute force alone. He used his wits, ducking under a wild swing, and with a single, well-aimed blow of his club, struck the goblin's head clean from his shoulders. It sailed through the air an astonishing distance, landing in a rabbit hole, a moment so bizarre it stunned both sides into silence. With their leader gone, the remaining goblins lost their nerve and scattered back to the mountains. The victory was absolute. Bull Roarer took return to legend. Songs were composed about the Battle of Greenfields, their tunes lively, and their verses full of his larger-than-life exploits. His act of courage proved that the spirit of the Shire was not just one of peace, but of fierce protection when called upon. This new confidence inspired a profound shift. Hobbits, who had always been people of the present moment, began to look to their past. They started to write down their stories, from the crossing of the Brandywine to the tale of the Bull Roarer himself. They realized that their peace was not a gift, but a legacy, one that required remembrance to protect. The party field began not as an official decree, but as a shared impulse for beauty. After the triumph of the Green Dragon, the hobbits felt a collective desire to create a space dedicated purely to joy, a canvas for their celebrations. They chose a wide, sun-drenched meadow near the water, and the families of the Shire turned their friendly rivalries toward a new goal, growing the most vibrant flowers and the lushest, most perfect grass. The field became a living tapestry of color and scent, a testament to their belief that cultivating happiness was as important as cultivating crops. Then the rain stopped. The skies remained a hard, cloudless blue for weeks on end. The vibrant greens of the party field began to fade to a brittle yellow, and the brilliant flower heads drooped, their petals curling in despair. The cheerful competition turned into a quiet, anxious vigil. A barren, dusty field would be more than an eyesore. It would be a blow to their collective spirit, a symbol of their joy, withering under an unforgiving sun. The stakes were the very heart of their community. Mayor Will Whitfoot, seeing the crisis, did not command. He called a meeting at the edge of the parched grass. He acknowledged the fear and the natural instinct to protect one's own private garden first. Then, with a gentle but firm resolve, he proposed a solution, a shared watering Rota. Every family, from the largest landowner to the smallest crofter, would take a turn channeling water from the now sluggish river to nour the common field. It was a request for sacrifice, for a fair contribution to the common good. Some grumbled, of course, worried about their own wilting vegetable patches. But the mayor walked from smile to smile, his pipe in hand, and spoke not of duty, but of shared pride. He asked them to picture the next great party, to remember the laughter and the music that would once again rise from a field they had saved together. His patient diplomacy worked. A new rhythm took hold in the Shire, the rhythm of cooperation. Buckets were passed along human chains at dawn, and clever little channels were dug to guide every precious drop to the thirstiest roots. The shared labor under the hot sun became its own kind of celebration. Slowly, miraculously, the field began to recover. The green returned, deeper and more resilient than before, and the flowers bloomed with a fierce, triumphant brilliance. As the field flourished, it began to attract new visitors. Butterflies in clouds of shimmering color danced above the clover, and friendly bees from every corner of the Shire buzzed a constant, contented song. It was said that even the elusive elves, passing silently through the woods, would sometimes pause at the edge of the light to smile at the scene, adding their own unseen magic to the air. The field was no longer just a place for hobbits. It had become the beating, joyful heart of the land itself. The quiet rhythm of the Shire was broken one afternoon by the sound of heavy boots on the road. A company of dwarves, their travel-stained cloaks and sturdy packs, marking them as folk from distant lands, moved through Hobbiton with a purposeful stride. Their deep voices rumbled in conversation, and the glint of polished axe handles caught the sun, a sight both fascinating and alarming to the hobbits, peering from their round windows. Here was the outside world, walking boldly down their lane. A deep divide opened instantly among the onlookers. Some hobbits, their hearts rooted in comfort and routine, saw only a disruption. They whispered of the dwarves' loud manners, their unfamiliar songs, and the sheer strangeness of their presence. They feared the careful order of their lives might be unsettled by these rugged travelers. Yet others watched with a keen, curious light in their eyes, wondering what stories and news from forgotten kingdoms these strangers might carry. The risk was a choice between two futures. To shun the dwarves was to cling to a safe but isolated existence, willfully ignorant of the wider world. To welcome them, however, was to acknowledge that the Shire was part of a larger tapestry, with all the unpredictable alliances and knowledge that might bring. It was Bilbo's own grandfather, the Old Took, who made the decision that would echo in family legend. He stood from his bench, brushed the crumbs from his waistcoat, and walked out to meet the travelers. With a hobbit's innate sense of hospitality, he invited the entire company to rest their weary feet in the great smile of Tuckborough. That evening, the firelit halls echoed not with quiet hobbit melodies, but with the deep-throated singing of dwarven lays, tales of lost halls and distant mountains. The old Took listened, his pipe forgotten, as the dwarves spoke of their quest to reclaim a homeland far to the east, a place called the Lonely Mountain. They spoke of a dragon, of ancient treasure, and of a longing for home that felt strangely familiar to the hobbits who had once crossed a river to find their own. When the dwarves departed at first light, their thanks were gruff but sincere. A new silence settled over the Shire, but it was a different kind of quiet, filled with the echoes of their songs. The hobbits returned to their gardens and their market stalls, yet their conversations now held a new, wondrous thread. They pondered the vast, unimaginable world that lay beyond the familiar hedges, a world of epic journeys and forgotten kings. And in the heart of a particular young hobbit, one who had listened most intently to the tales of fire and gold, a quiet, restless feeling began to stir, a faint but undeniable whisper of adventure. That restless feeling in the hearts of hobbits was soon soothed by the turning of the seasons. A year of perfect sun and gentle rain blessed the Shire, and the land gave back its bounty 100-fold. The fields of the Marish grew so heavy with golden wheat that their stalks bowed low, while the orchards of Tuckborough hung thick with apples, their branches creaking under the weight. It was a great harvest, a time when every hobbit, from the smallest font to the most respected elder, took up a basket or a scythe and joined the great communal effort. Laughter and song filled the air from dawn till dusk, a cheerful symphony of labor and shared purpose, as the last wagon rumbled into Hobbiton, piled high with pumpkins and grain. A profound sense of security settled over the land. Every smile had a larder fit for a king, and the shared storehouses were overflowing. This abundance was a new kind of test. For the first time, the hobbits faced the question of what to do with true surplus. The immediate response was one of generous spirit. Those with a little extra shared freely with those who had a little less, strengthening the bonds of community. Yet this new wealth also cast subtle shadows. A few hobbits, their memories of leaner times still sharp, looked at their brimming cellars and felt a gnawing anxiety. What if this was the last great harvest? What if the next winter was as long and cruel as the one from the old tales? This fear curdled into greed in the hearts of a small number, most notably a well-to-do farmer named Lobelia Sackville Baggins and her like-minded cousins. They began to quietly hoard, building secret storage spaces and diverting more than their fair share from the communal carts. Their actions whispered about in the market square. The cheerful unity of the harvest began to fray at the edges, replaced by sidelong glances and a prickly sense of distrust. The stakes of this quiet conflict were deceptively high. Allowing this hoarding to continue would poison the spirit of fellowship that was the Shire's greatest strength. It risked creating a division between the haves and the have-nots, a concept once foreign to hobbit kind. Furthermore, poor management of this bounty could lead to terrible waste, with food rotting in hidden cellars while others might face need in the future. It fell to the Tyne, the steady leader of the Shire Moot, to address the growing tension. He did not call for a public shaming or a harsh punishment. Instead, he invited all the families to a meeting under the party tree. There, he spoke not of greed, but of foresight. He acknowledged the natural desire to provide for one's own, but he painted a vivid picture of a future Shire where no hobbit went to bed hungry, even in a lean year, because they had all cared for the bounty together. He proposed a simple, fair system. A central granary would be maintained in each farthing, stocked by a small, agreed-upon percentage from every family's harvest. This reserve would be managed by a rotating committee and used only in times of genuine community need. His decision was a masterstroke of Hobbit sense. It respected individual effort while safeguarding the collective good. It turned the act of sharing from a personal favor into a shared responsibility, a quiet promise they made to each other and to the future. The grumbling of the hoarders faded, unable to argue against such pragmatic kindness. With the larders full and hearts reconciled, the Shire could finally turn its full attention to the harvest festival. The air grew crisp with the promise of autumn, and the party field was prepared for the greatest celebration any Hobbit could remember, a time for profound gratitude and joyful reflection on the fortune they had cultivated together. The laughter of faunts at play near the woody end carried a new, breathless excitement. They returned to their smiles with wide eyes, speaking in hushed tones of fair-haired figures glimpsed between the ancient trunks. Beings of such grace and silence, they were named the White Woses. The story spread from child to child, a delicate thread of wonder woven into the familiar fabric of the Shire. For the youngsters, it was a thrilling confirmation that their world held more magic than even the oldest tales suggested. Their parents and grandparents, however, met the news with a knowing shake of the head. To them, it was mere fancy, the product of overactive imaginations, fueled by dappled sunlight and shifting shadows. "Do not trouble the woods with your daydreams," they would say, their voices tinged with a practical caution born of generations. This dismissal only sharpened the children's insistence, creating a quiet rift between the comfort of the known and the irresistible pull of the unknown. One curious lass, a brandybuck named Primula, felt this divide more keenly than most. She believed the children utterly, yet she also understood the older hobbit's wariness. Rather than argue, she chose a different path, one of quiet respect. She began to leave small, handcrafted gifts at the very edge where the tall grass met the dark trees, a perfect, sun-ripened apple, a little crown of summer flowers, a smooth river stone she had painted with a single bright berry. She asked for nothing in return, offering these tokens as a simple gesture of goodwill toward the silent, watchful woods. The stakes of her quiet investigation were felt by the whole community, though none spoke of it aloud. If the White Woses were benign, a gentle connection could reveal unseen guardians who blessed the land. But if they were proud or easily offended, such attention might provoke powers far beyond a hobbit's understanding. To ignore the mystery entirely, however, felt like a willful blindness, a choice to never fully know the home they cherished. Days turned into weeks, and Primula's gifts continued to vanish without a sound, without a trace. No one ever saw them taken, yet a subtle change settled over the woody end. The air near the tree line seemed a little sweeter, the songs of the birds a little clearer. A profound sense of peace, deeper than mere quiet, emanated from the forest. The hobbits began to speak of a gentle, watchful presence, a feeling that they were not merely living on the land, but living with it, cared for by something ancient and kind. This unspoken bond became the Shire's most treasured secret, a layer of mystery that required no proof, only a quiet heart to believe. It was a magic that asked for nothing but respect, and in return, It seemed to weave a protective warmth into the very soil, a silent promise that they were not alone. The warmth of that great harvest festival lingered, a shared feeling of contentment that settled deep in every Hobbit heart. It was this very sense of a rich and storied present that turned their thoughts toward the past. What if the memory of Bulroar Took's great club faded, or the story of the first party tree was lost to time? This collective worry gave birth to a grand idea: the founding of the Mathom house in Mitchell Delving. A Mathom, as every Hobbit knows, is a thing for which you have no immediate use, but which you are utterly unwilling to throw away. The old smile chosen for the purpose was perfect, its round rooms and winding halls ready to be filled with the physical echoes of their history. The call went out for families to donate heirlooms and artifacts, and the response was immediate and heartfelt. Soon, a fascinating collection began to grow. A weathered walking stick, said to have belonged to Marcho himself, was laid carefully in a place of honor. Bulroar Took's actual club, a massive and splintered thing, was mounted on the wall, drawing gasps from every visiting font. There were delicate ceramic plates, painted with the flowers of long-vanished gardens, and tarnished silver spoons from the first feasts at the Green Dragon. Each object held a story, a silent lesson for new generations about the courage, community, and quiet joys that built the Shire. This treasure trove became the heart of their cultural memory, a place where any Hobbit could walk in and feel the weight and warmth of their own heritage. Yet, deciding what was truly worthy of display proved more complicated than anyone had anticipated. Heated debates would erupt in the Mathom house dooryard. Is my great-great Tance button collection truly less important than old Took's favorite pipe? Some families, fiercely proud, were deeply reluctant to part with their treasures, even for the public good. They feared their great-grandmother's lace handkerchief would be lost in the crowd, its personal significance overlooked. The risk was a collection that felt exclusive, representing only the loudest voices or the wealthiest families, leaving the smaller, quieter stories to be forgotten. This tension threatened to divide the very community the museum was meant to unite. Seeing the discord, the mayor intervened with a solution of elegant simplicity. He proposed a rotating exhibit system. No family would have to permanently give up their cherished Mathom. Instead, they would loan it to the Mathom house for a season or a year, after which it would be returned with gratitude and a small, engraved token of the Shire's thanks. This ensured that every family, from the Grand Tooks to the most modest farmers, could see their history honored in turn. The system celebrated the sheer diversity of their shared experience, making the museum a living, breathing chronicle of all Hobbits, not just a few. The stakes of this endeavor were quietly profound. Without a dedicated effort to preserve their past, the Shire's history risked fading into a handful of exaggerated tavern tales, its true lessons lost. But with the Mathom house thriving, they strengthened their collective identity and the resilience that came from it. A young Hobbit, seeing the patched jacket of a forebear who survived the long winter, understood the value of perseverance in a way no lecture could convey. As the Mathom house filled with these tangible memories, it inspired a quieter, more personal revolution. Hobbits who had never put pen to paper began to write down their own family stories, the recipes passed through generations, and the local legends of their particular corner of the Shire. They realized that preserving their peace required remembering not just the great battles, but the small, daily acts of kindness that truly defined their home. This act of writing wove a final, enduring thread into the fabric of their society, a silent promise that nothing of importance would ever be truly forgotten. That quiet confidence was soon put to the test. A group of rough-looking men, led by a surly character named Bill Fernie, drifted into Bywater one gray morning. They were not passing through. They took over an old, unused shed on the edge of the village and declared their intention to stay, their loud voices and careless manners casting a chill over the usually cheerful lane. They were not there to trade or work, but to take, helping themselves to vegetables from gardens and ale from the inn without a word of thanks. The easy rhythm of life in Bywater faltered. Doors that were usually left open were now shut and bolted. Parents called their children inside a little earlier each evening. The risk was clear and immediate. If these ruffians were allowed to settle, their presence would poison the well of community trust. They represented a slow erosion of everything the Hobbits held dear, a small crack that could one day split the Shire wide open. It was Farmer Cotton, a stout and sensible hobbit with a deep love for his land, who decided enough was enough. He would not raise a fist, but he would not look away. He called a meeting in his own barn and proposed a plan of peaceful, persistent resistance. He organized a neighborhood watch, not to fight, but to bear witness. Teams of hobbits would simply be present wherever the ruffians went, their quiet, watchful eyes a constant reminder that they were being observed. The true stroke of genius, however, was the weapon they chose: overwhelming hobbit hospitality. The next morning, as the ruffians emerged from their shed, they were met not with anger, but with a baffling wave of kindness. A steady stream of neighbors arrived, each bearing a gift. They brought them platters of food, but the pies were comically oversalted, and the cakes filled with bitter herbs. They offered them mugs of ale that had been watered down to a tasteless brew. They presented them with hand-knitted socks that were several sizes too small, and shirts with sleeves sewn shut. The hobbits would not leave, standing by with hopeful, unblinking smiles until the gifts were accepted. Day after day, this campaign of cheerful nuisance continued. The ruffians found their sleep disturbed by groups of hobbits, singing loudly and off-key, just outside their door at all hours. Their attempts to intimidate were met with polite, confused questions about the weather. Farmer Cotton's daughter, Rosie, even organized a troop of faunts to follow the men around, asking them endless, innocent questions about where they came from and when they planned to go home. The men were not being challenged with force, but they were being utterly worn down by a relentless, confusing, and deeply frustrating display of community. Their surly bluster began to crumble into exhausted bewilderment. They could not pick a fight with someone who offered them a poorly baked seed cake. The stakes of this quiet standoff were profound. A violent confrontation would have shattered the Shire's peace and changed the Hobbits' view of themselves forever. But by using their wits and their unity, they proved that their greatest strength was their ability to protect their home without becoming like the very bull they sought to remove. One rainy morning, the hobbits of Bywater awoke to find the shed empty. Bill Fernie and his band were gone, having slipped away in the night, defeated not by swords, but by a stubborn, clever, and united front of common sense. The victory at Bywater sent a ripple of newfound pride through the entire Shire. They had faced a threat not from myth or distant lands, but from their own doorstep, and they had handled it themselves, on their own terms. This success planted a quiet, sturdy confidence in every Hobbit heart, a belief that no matter what the world might bring, they possessed the collective wit and will to see it through. The road through the East Farthing fell into a hushed silence one twilight as a company of elves emerged from the misty woods. They moved with a grace that seemed to bend the very air around them, their voices raised in a song that held the memory of ancient stars and fading light. Hobbits working in their late gardens stopped, their hands still in the soil, utterly captivated. This was not the boisterous song of the Green Dragon, but a melody that spoke of vast ages and a sorrow so beautiful it made the heart ache. The encounter lasted only a few moments, a procession of luminous figures passing like a dream, but the feeling they left behind lingered for weeks. A quiet melancholy settled over the Shire, a bittersweet understanding that their cozy world was but a small, bright corner in a story of unimaginable scale. This brush with the sublime stirred a deep conflict among the hobbits. Some, like the practical farmers of the Marish, felt a strange sense of inadequacy. Their own lives of good food and simple comforts seemed suddenly small and earthbound compared to the elves' timeless journey. They shook their heads, dismissing the haunting songs as too grand, too sad for sensible folk, and retreated further into the reassuring solidity of their routines. But for others, especially the artists and the dreamers, the elves' visit was a spark. A young musician named Robin Smallborough, who had been there that evening, found he could not forget the sound. He felt his own cheerful fiddle tunes were clumsy and loud in comparison, yet he was not discouraged. He was inspired. Robin made a decision that would quietly shape the Shire's music for generations. He would not try to copy the elves' impossible elegance. Instead, he would try to capture the echo of their feeling, to translate that ethereal beauty into a language his own people could understand. He spent evenings on the porch of his smile, his flute in hand, experimenting. He wove the familiar, comforting melodies of the Shire with new, softer notes that seemed to yearn for something just out of reach. The song he composed was not an elvish lay, but a hobbit's memory of one, full of the warmth of the hearth and a gentle, wistful longing for the starlight. The stakes of this cultural choice were subtle but profound. To embrace this new influence was to allow Hobbit culture to grow, to become richer and more nuanced, capable of expressing a wider range of human emotion. It was a risk, certainly, a step away from the comfortable and known, but to reject it, to cling only to what was already familiar, was to choose a kind of stasis, to remain forever insular and unchanged in a world that was far more vast and wondrous than they had ever admitted. The memory of the elves passing slowly wove itself into the fabric of Shire life, no longer a disruptive shock, but a cherished secret. Hobbits began to find small, elegant ways to honor that feeling. Gardeners planted silver-leafed herbs that shimmered in the twilight, and weavers incorporated more delicate patterns into their textiles, subtle nods to a beauty that had briefly touched their land. They learned that grace was not something foreign, but a quality they could cultivate in their own way, adding a new, deeper layer to the enduring comfort of home. The gentle hills of Tuckborough held a secret ambition. The Took family, their numbers and their influence growing with each passing generation, faced a simple problem of space and pride. Their ancestral smile was no longer large enough to host their sprawling clan, let alone the gatherings that their status as Tynes demanded. So they embarked on a project of breathtaking scale, the excavation of the Great Smile. It was not merely an expansion, but the carving of a subterranean palace, a labyrinth of warm tunnels, grand halls, and cozy burrows that would become the undeniable heart of their family. The initial vision was one of pure size, a declaration of Tookish prominence etched into the very earth. But as the diggers began their work, the true challenges emerged. The soil in one wing proved unstable, threatening to swallow their progress in a slide of mud and rock. Within the family itself, disputes flared over the design. Some argued for deep, windowless feasting halls for maximum security and warmth, while others, remembering the cheerful light of Hobbiton, pleaded for more connection to the outside world. The unity of the Tooks was being tested by the very project meant to celebrate them. The Tyne at the time, a wise old hobbit named Isengrim II, listened to the arguments with a patient ear. He saw the risk of building a grand but gloomy fortress that turned inward on itself. He made a decision that would define Hobbit architecture for centuries. He decreed that the Great Smile would not be a dark warren, but a home filled with light. He insisted on the creation of large round windows that looked out onto the gardens, and most innovatively, he ordered the construction of internal courtyards. These were open to the sky above, allowing sunlight to pour down into the very center of the hill, where gardens of ferns and flowers could thrive even underground. This blend of deep comfort and living beauty was a masterstroke. The stakes of this endeavor were felt in every scoop of earth. A poorly planned smile could lead to a catastrophic collapse, a physical and symbolic ruin of the Took name. Even if it stood, a building born from family discord would always carry the chill of those arguments in its walls. But a successful Great Smile would do more than house a single clan. It would become a symbol for the entire Shire, a testament to what hobbits could achieve when they blended ambition with good sense and a love for growing things. When the last pantry was stocked and the final rug laid, the Great Smile stood as a marvel. Its halls were not just large, they were alive, filled with the scent of earth and blooming flowers from the inner gardens. It immediately became the new center for the Shire's most important gatherings. Hobbits from every family would travel for days to attend a feast in its grand hall, their voices mingling under the vaulted ceilings, their differences softened by the shared wonder of the place. In the warm light of those courtyards, amidst the laughter and the clinking of glasses, the ambitions of individual families slowly wove themselves into the shared ambition of a people. A peculiar leaf first took root in the sheltered gardens of the South Farthing. Hobbit farmers there, ever curious about the soil's potential, noticed a wild plant with broad, fragrant leaves. They began to experiment, crossbreeding different strains and testing various methods of drying and curing the leaves in their cellars. It was a slow, patient process of trial and error, driven by a simple question of whether this local plant could offer a new kind of comfort. The farmer who perfected the art was Tobold Hornblower, a gentle hobbit with a particular talent for cultivation. He discovered that by drying the leaves slowly over a low, smoldering fire of applewood, they developed a rich, smooth flavor that was both calming and uplifting. He called his discovery pipe weed, and the practice of enjoying its smoke quickly became a cherished ritual. Soon, the demand for this South Farthing leaf spread across the Shire, turning a local experiment into a beloved export that brought mild fame and welcome trade from passing dwarves and even the occasional ranger. Not every hobbit welcomed this new habit, however. A vocal group of conservatives, led by a stern elder named Odo Proudfoot, viewed the spreading smoke rings with deep suspicion. They worried that this new vice would lead to laziness, with hobbits spending their afternoons in idle puffing rather than tending to their gardens and duties. Odo argued passionately in the inns that they were introducing a foreign corruption, a slow poison to their sturdy way of life. The debate grew heated, pitting tradition against the pursuit of a new, peaceful pleasure. Tobold Hornblower faced a critical choice. He could have guarded his growing techniques as a valuable secret, ensuring his family's wealth and control over the trade. Instead, he decided to share his knowledge openly with any farmer who wished to learn. He believed that pipe weed, enjoyed in moderation, could bring simple joy without causing harm, and that sharing this gift would strengthen the community far more than hoarding it ever could. The stakes of this cultural conflict were quiet but profound. To reject pipe weed outright would be to stifle a harmless innovation born from their own soil, potentially closing the door on future comforts. But to accept it without thought risked validating the fears of the traditionalists and introducing a genuine distraction from their hardworking values. Tobold's generous decision tipped the scales. By making the craft accessible to all, he demystified pipe weed and integrated it into the daily rhythm of life, not as a vice, but as a punctuation mark for a day's good work. As the sweet scent of pipe weed became a permanent feature of Shire evenings, it inspired a quiet blossoming of other crafts. Artisans began carving intricate pipes from briar and fine clay, and weavers created special pouches to hold the precious leaves. The Shire's reputation for quality and comfort began to spread beyond its borders, carried on the very smoke that curled so peacefully above its hills. The eastern edge of the Shire now held a quiet, constant presence. The Brandywine Bridge, once a simple crossing for local farmers and adventurous souls, became the focus of a new and solemn duty. A small, wooden watch house was built on the Buckland side, and a Rota of volunteers took turns gazing out across the water, their pipes glowing like patient fireflies in the deepening dusk. This was not a fortress, but a statement, a line drawn not in stone, but in vigilance. The watch brought a profound sense of comfort to the families of the East Farthing, a reassurance that their peace was actively guarded. Yet with that comfort came a subtle, lingering reminder. Every hobbit who passed the bridge and nodded to the watchful figure was quietly acknowledging that their sanctuary was not a default state of the world, but something precious that required tending. The sight of the watch house, so close to home, kept the memory of distant troubles and the tale of Bill Fernie's ruffians from fading entirely. This new responsibility soon sparked a familiar debate in the common rooms of Brandy Hall. Was this constant watch truly necessary, or was it a costly overreaction to a passing problem? Every volunteer meant one less pair of hands for the harvest, and maintaining the post required supplies that came from the shared stores of Buckland. Some argued passionately that the Shire's best defense was its obscurity, and that posting a guard only made them look fearful, or, worse, interesting. The master of Buckland, a pragmatic leader named Gorbodoc Brandybuck, listened to these concerns with a steady hand. He saw the risk of letting the watch become a burden that bred resentment. His decision was one of careful fairness. He organized the duty not as a punishment, but as an honor, a short-term service that every able-bodied hobbit in the region would share in turn. He ensured the Rota was posted well in advance, and that no family was overly burdened, blending the duty seamlessly into the rhythm of their lives. The stakes of his choice were felt by everyone along the river. To let the watch lapse out of complacency was to risk a far greater disruption, an unwelcome surprise from the outside that could shatter their peace in a single afternoon. But to maintain it with diligence was to protect the very isolation that defined them, ensuring that the only footprints on the bridge were those of friends and expected guests. As the seasons turned, the steady rhythm of the watch began to weave itself into the character of the Bucklanders. The hobbits who took their turn there often spoke of the quiet satisfaction that came from the duty, of watching the sun rise over the misty river and knowing they played a part in preserving the gentle dream behind them. They began to see themselves not just as residents of a peaceful land, but as its quiet guardians, a role that required no grand weapons, only a loyal heart and a watchful eye. The first winter snows arrived early that year, and with them came a quiet gloom that settled deep in the bones of the Shire. The days were short, the nights long and cold, and a collective sigh seemed to hang over the hobbit holes. It was from this shared longing for light that the idea for the Festival of Starlight was born. The plan was simple, yet profound. On the longest night of the year, every hobbit would place a lantern in their window or garden, and families would gather to share their oldest tales under the brilliant winter sky. It was a promise of warmth and fellowship in the heart of the cold, a deliberate kindling of hope. The entire community threw themselves into the preparations with cheerful energy, weaving garlands of evergreen and polishing their finest glass lanterns. The anticipation became a second fire in every hearth, a shared project that made the deepening chill feel like a prelude to celebration. Then the blizzard came. It began as a gentle flurry, but quickly grew into a howling tempest of white, swallowing paths and burying fences. The wind screamed around the smiles, and the world outside vanished into a swirling, impenetrable wall. The cheerful plans for a starlit gathering were suddenly impossible. The risk was a profound disappointment, a surrender to the winter's harshness that could let the gloom sink its roots even deeper into their spirits. A failed festival would feel like a victory for the cold and the dark. The decision was made not by any single mayor or tyne, but in a dozen quiet conversations as neighbors checked on one another through the storm. They would not let the weather cancel their promise of light. If they could not gather under the stars, they would bring the gathering inside. What followed was a masterpiece of hobbit improvisation. The great smiles of Tuckborough and Brandy Hall threw open their round doors, becoming sudden, sprawling venues. Families who had prepared lanterns for their gardens instead hung them from cozy, earth-walled ceilings, casting 100 points of golden light that mirrored the stars hidden beyond the storm. Musicians tucked themselves into corners, their fiddles and flutes weaving melodies that mingled with the crackle of the fires and the laughter of children. The stories told at night were not shouted to the sky, but shared in intimate circles, their meanings seeming richer and more personal in the warm, firelit closeness. The stakes of their simple decision were quietly immense. By refusing to let the blizzard defeat their spirit, they transformed a potential disaster into their fondest midwinter memory. They proved that joy was not dependent on perfect conditions, but was a flame they could kindle themselves anywhere, under any circumstances. The Festival of Starlight became an instant and cherished tradition, a yearly reminder of their own resilience. And in the cozy, lantern-lit warmth of those smiles, as they shared tales of long ago, their thoughts naturally turned upward, past the storm and the rooftops, to wonder about the ancient, silent stories written in the constellations above. The mist that clung to the Barrow Downs seemed to swallow sound itself. A small group of adventurous hobbits, led by a young Brandybuck scholar named Rowan, found the silence there more profound than any they had known. The great grassy mounds rose like the sleeping backs of ancient giants, and the air carried a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. It was a place that felt both empty and watchful. Their exploration was driven not by a desire for treasure, but by a deep curiosity about the land that bordered their own. When Rowan's hand brushed against a cold, smooth stone, half buried in the turf, he uncovered not just an artifact, but a mystery. It was a simple brooch, wrought in a style no hobbit smith had ever used, its silver still untarnished by the centuries. The find was thrilling, yet a palpable unease settled over the group. One of his companions swore she felt a faint pressure on her shoulder, as if a hand had gently rested there for a moment before fading away. The Downs were not merely old, they were occupied. The conflict within the little band was immediate. Some argued for taking the brooch back to the Mathom house, to be studied and displayed as a piece of history. But Rowan felt a deep conviction that this was the wrong path. He looked at the brooch lying in his palm and felt not ownership, but a responsibility. He made a decision that would define their expedition. They would not remove a single object from the Downs. Instead, he would document everything, sketching the brooch and the carvings on the standing stones, and commit to writing the old rhymes and half-remembered tales about the Barrow Wights that the Bucklanders whispered by firelight. His aim was to understand, not to possess. The stakes of their choice were felt in the very atmosphere. To treat the Downs as a simple curiosity, to pocket relics as souvenirs, felt like a profound disrespect that could stir something best left sleeping. Whispers spoke of a deep magic woven into the land, a protective slumber that guarded the resting places of forgotten kings. Disturbing that sleep risked awakening not just memories, but a lingering sorrow or a dormant curse that could spill into the quieter parts of the Shire. Yet, to approach with reverence, to listen rather than to take, might earn the approval of whatever ancient presence watched over the mounds. Rowan spent the rest of the day carefully recording all he saw, returning the brooch to the exact spot where he had found it. As the sun began to set, painting the mist in hues of orange and gold, the oppressive feeling in the air seemed to lighten. The unnatural chill retreated, replaced by the ordinary cool of evening. It felt less like a retreat and more like a quiet approval, as if the land itself was acknowledging their care. They left the Barrow Downs as they found them, but they carried away a new and vital piece of Shire lore, a deeper understanding that their home was built upon layers of history far older than their own. This knowledge did not frighten them, but instilled a lasting and healthy caution, a respect for the silent agreements between the living and the long departed. The first ranger was seen as little more than a shadow, a against the distant line of trees. A tall, grim figure wrapped in a worn gray cloak. He moved with a silence that was unnerving to the hobbits who spotted him from a safe distance. He carried a long sword at his hip, a sight that sent a ripple of alarm through the market gossip in Bywater. Who was this silent watcher, and what business did he have on the very edge of their peaceful land? The debate that followed was swift and heated. Many hobbits, their minds full of tales of troublesome outsiders, viewed the rangers with deep suspicion. They saw only vagabonds and wanderers, their stern faces and secretive ways suggesting hidden agendas that could not possibly be friendly. A few more observant souls, however, noticed smaller details. They saw how the rangers never crossed the border, how they seemed to watch the roads leading into the Shire rather than the comforts within. They spotted the occasional broken blade of a goblin arrow near the hedges, or the strange, un-hobbit-like footprints that always seemed to vanish back toward the wilderness. These quiet guardians were not looking in, they were looking out. The Tyne, after listening to all the fearful whispers and the few calm observations, faced a delicate choice. He could post more hobbits to challenge the rangers, a move that would certainly alienate them, or he could do nothing, leaving his people anxious and these mysterious figures unacknowledged. He chose a third path, one of quiet, hobbit-like diplomacy. He gave instructions for a small, covered basket to be left at a certain stone at the border crossroads each week. It was never an extravagant gift, just a loaf of fresh bread, a wedge of cheese, a pouch of pipe weed, and a bottle of good ale. There was no note, no demand for a meeting. It was a simple offering, a gesture of thanks for a protection most would never see. The stakes of this unspoken arrangement were profound. To frighten the rangers away with hostility would be to strip the Shire of its most effective, if unseen, shield. The dangers they turned aside, from roaming wolves to bands of desperate men, were real, and without these silent watchers, such threats might one day find their way to a hobbit's very doorstep. Yet, to formally welcome them was to admit that their peace was more fragile than they liked to believe, that it required the edge of a sword held in another's hand to remain unbroken. The Tyne's quiet compromise honored both their need for safety and their love of a quiet life. As the years turned, the rangers became a part of the landscape, a faint, reassuring shadow on the periphery of the Shire's consciousness. Hobbits grew accustomed to the occasional glimpse of a gray cloak on a far hill, and the weekly basket at the border stone became a quiet ritual, always empty by the next morning. The Shire slept soundly in its beds, its dreams untroubled, guarded by steadfast friends whose names they did not know and whose sacrifices they would never fully understand. This deep, unspoken trust allowed a new kind of legend to take root, one not of battles fought, but of a peace so profound it felt like the natural order of the world. A seed unlike any other arrived in the Shire, nestled in a small, smooth, worn wooden box. It was a gift from a traveler who passed through with little fanfare, a single, silver-hued nut, said to be from a malorn tree of a faraway golden wood. The hobbits gathered around it in the party field, their curiosity tinged with a deep uncertainty. This was not a seed for a common apple or a sturdy oak. It was a piece of a world so distant, it felt like a story. Some whispered that such a grand, foreign thing might not take to their humble soil, that its roots would find no comfort in the familiar earth of the Shire, and would simply wither a sad reminder of wonders that did not belong. Others feared its very presence might change the land they loved, casting a strange, un-Hobbit-like shadow over their cheerful field. The decision to plant it was an act of faith, a quiet gamble on the generosity of the wider world. The care of this precious seed fell to a young gardener named Hamfast, an ancestor of the Gamgee line, known for his patient hands and his belief that any growing thing, no matter how strange, responded to kindness and good earth. He did not try to force the Malorn to be something it was not. Instead, he treated it with the same gentle wisdom he used for his prized tomatoes. He found the sunniest, most sheltered spot in the party field, mixed the soil with just the right compost, and built a small wattle fence to protect the delicate sprout from stray feet and the brisk wind. He spoke to it as he worked, not with grand words, but with the simple, comforting chatter of a gardener to his charge. The stakes of his quiet labor felt immense. If the Malorn flourished, it would be a living bridge to the sublime, a daily reminder that their small corner of the world was touched by a greater, more beautiful magic. Its success would be a blessing, a symbol that peace could take root and grow even more radiant. But if it failed, if the silver leaf turned brown and crumpled, it would feel like a door closing, a sign that the highest wonders were not for them, that the Shire was meant to remain only what it had always been. For seasons, the young tree grew slowly, its bark pale and smooth, its leaves a soft, shimmering green. Then, one spring evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, the Malorn produced its first blossoms. They were not like any flower the hobbits had seen, delicate clusters that seemed to hold the twilight itself, emitting a soft, golden light that filled the air around the party field. A profound and abiding peace settled over the watching hobbits, a feeling that their home was now, and would forever be, a sanctuary of light. That shimmering Malorn tree was a gift from the world, but the true strength of the Shire was always its own. This was never clearer than during the raising of the 3 Farthing stone. The idea was born from a simple need, a way to mark the precise spot where the borders of the east, west, and south Farthings met, a crossroads for all hobbits. The plan was to erect a great standing stone, a permanent landmark that would symbolize their shared home. The project began with tremendous goodwill, with volunteers from every corner bringing tools and enthusiasm to the site. But as the great stone was levered into its place, the first crack of disagreement appeared. What should be carved upon its smooth face? A hobbit from the sturdy Marish argued for a sheaf of wheat, representing their fertile fields and the bread that fed the Shire. A representative from Tuckborough insisted on the head of a bull, a clear nod to the legendary bull roarer Took and the courage of their family. A gentle hobbit from the South Farthing proposed a simple, open pipe, a symbol of the comfort and peace they all cherished. Each suggestion felt right to its proponent, and each dismissal felt like a rejection of their own Farthing's vital contribution. The cheerful work stalled, replaced by a stubborn silence, as regional pride dug in its heels. The stakes were deceptively high. This was more than an argument over a carving. It was a test of whether the Shire saw itself as one people or a loose collection of rival regions. To let the stone stand blank would be a monument to their failure to agree, a constant reminder of division at the very heart of their land. But to force one symbol over the others would breed a quiet resentment that could linger for generations, weakening them from within. The solution came from an unexpected quarter, from a young lass who had been quietly listening to the debates while sketching in the dirt. She approached the arguing elders not with a new design, but with a question. Why must we choose only one? Her simple insight broke the deadlock. They decided to carve all three symbols, weaving them together into a single, harmonious design. The sheaf of wheat stood proudly at the base. The bull's head looked out boldly from the center, and a curling pipe smoke drifted peacefully across the top. It was a perfect compromise, a celebration of their diversity within a greater unity. With the conflict resolved, the final carving was completed in a spirit of renewed fellowship. The 3 Farthing stone became more than a marker. It became the Shire's heart. Hobbits traveling from distant parts would make a point of stopping there, resting a hand on the cool stone and reading the story of their shared home in its carved faces. News was exchanged, friendships were forged, and the bonds between the Farthings grew stronger with every meeting. At this crossroads of their world, they remembered that their true strength was not in any one field, family, or leaf, but in the quiet promise they had made to each other, a promise etched not just in stone, but in the very spirit of the land. Evening smoke from the gaffer's pipes began to gather more purposefully at the Ivy Bush Inn. It started as a simple habit, these old hobbits settling on their favorite bench to share a quiet word about the weather or the soil. But soon, their conversations deepened, becoming a living library of the Shire's hard-won knowledge. They spoke of the subtle signs that foretold a harsh winter, the way to mend a strained friendship over a shared pint, and which fields were best left fallow to keep the earth strong. This was not a formal council with rules and titles, but something far more powerful, an informal gathering where experience itself was offered freely to any who would listen. Their laughter, rich and weathered, carried the weight of generations, and their advice became a gentle, steadying hand on the shoulder of the entire community. Not every young hobbit had the patience for these tales, however. To some restless youths, the gaffer's stories felt like dusty relics, old-fashioned notions that had no place in a modern shire. They would roll their eyes at warnings about planting times or the importance of knowing one's neighbors, convinced their own ideas were newer and therefore better. This dismissal created a quiet but real tension, a gap in understanding where valuable lessons were lost before they could even be heard. A young hobbit might dismiss a caution about the old forest as mere superstition, only to find himself hopelessly turned around on a path he thought he knew, or ignore advice on mending a fence, and later face the consequences of a strayed cow in the prize-winning cabbages. One young hobbit named Hamfast, however, decided to truly listen. While his friends chased more exciting distractions, he found himself drawn to the bench outside the inn, his own hands already stained with the good brown earth of his garden. He did not see old stories, he saw practical tools. When old Noakes grumbled about the particular slant of the sunlight in a certain week, Hamfast understood it was a lesson about planting schedules. When the gaffer spoke of the long winter and how the community had shared their last potatoes, Hamfast heard a blueprint for resilience, a lesson in how to care for one another when times grew lean. He realized these tales were not about the past at all. They were a map for the future, holding the keys to preserving everything the Shire held dear. The stakes of this choice between listening and dismissing were quietly profound. To ignore the gaffer's wisdom was to risk repeating every hardship their ancestors had already endured, from failed harvests to fractured friendships. Each forgotten lesson made the Shire a little more vulnerable, a little less prepared for the challenges that would inevitably come. But to heed this shared knowledge was to weave a stronger fabric for their society, ensuring that hard-won insights were not lost but built upon, guaranteeing continued prosperity and a peace that could weather any storm. As more hobbits like Hamfast began to absorb this deep-rooted wisdom, the very character of the Shire shifted. It felt more grounded, more resilient, its foundations strengthened by the voices of all who had come before, ready to greet the coming days with quiet confidence and a well-tended memory. The gentle flow of the water had always been the lifeblood of the villages along its banks. Then one afternoon, a young hobbit named Rowan, while skipping stones, noticed a faint, unpleasant smell and a murky discoloration near the reeds. A closer look revealed a sluggish film on the water's surface, and the fish seemed to have vanished from their usual sunny spots. A quiet alarm began to spread from smile to smile. This was not just a matter of an unsightly stream. It was a direct threat to the clean drinking water for half the West Farthing and the home of countless creatures who relied on the river. The initial response was a shared sense of dread, a fear that the very heart of their home was falling ill. The question of who was responsible, however, quickly turned that dread into a more uncomfortable tension. Careful observation traced the pollution upstream to several large, prosperous farms, where new methods of managing animal waste and washing heavy equipment were inadvertently fouling the current. These were not bad hobbits, but hard-working families who had simply not considered the downstream consequences of their necessary chores. Pointing fingers felt deeply un-hobbit-like, yet to say nothing was to let the poison spread. The stakes were as clear as the water once was. Allowing the pollution to continue risked sickness for families and the slow death of the river's vibrant ecosystem, a loss that would scar the land for generations. But confronting their neighbors risked fracturing the community with blame and resentment, creating divisions that could be just as lasting and damaging. It fell to the mayor to navigate these troubled waters. He did not summon the farmers to a public shaming. Instead, he invited all the families who lived along the river, from the source to the last mill, to a meeting on its very banks. He began not with accusations, but with a simple observation, asking everyone to look at the water and remember what it had been. He spoke of shared responsibility, framing the river not as a boundary between properties, but as a ribbon that connected them all. His gentle diplomacy turned a potential conflict into a collective problem-solving session. The farmers upstream, once defensive, acknowledged their part when they saw the concern in their neighbors' faces. Together, they forged a community agreement, a set of simple, sustainable practices. They planned new, safer waste areas set well back from the riverbank, and they agreed to a shared schedule for cleaning the most vulnerable stretches of the shore. The following weekend, the Great Water Clean-up began. It was not a chore, but a festival of care. Hobbits of all ages waded into the shallows with nets and baskets, pulling out tangled debris and clearing clogged channels. Laughter echoed where worried whispers had been, and by the end of the day, the river already seemed to flow more freely. The victory was visible. Within weeks, the water ran clear and sweet once more. The fish returned, and the kingfishers darted again along its banks. This success instilled a profound new ethic in the Shire, a deep-seated understanding that stewardship of their home was everyone's duty. With their river restored to its former glory, the Hobbits felt a renewed sense of pride and a sharpened eye for the other quiet wonders woven into their land. Their attention turned inward, to the hidden meadows and secret groves, now seen not just as parts of the scenery, but as treasures to be cherished and protected with the same fierce, gentle love they had shown the water. Whispers of Rivendell arrived with the autumn caravans, carried by dwarven traders whose deep voices held a new reverence. They spoke of a hidden valley where the air itself shimmered with ancient wisdom, a sanctuary of graceful arches and gentle light called the Last Homely House. For the first time, hobbits did not simply dismiss such tales as grand elvish fancies. Instead, a quiet yearning took root in a few thoughtful hearts. What if, they wondered, the Shire held a place of its own for quiet reflection, a simple haven where a troubled mind could find the same peace those travelers described? The vision was not to mimic elven towers, but to capture the feeling of sanctuary, to build a refuge that was deeply and uniquely Hobbit. This dream, however, soon met the hard ground of practical debate. Where could such a place be built without disturbing the working farms, and who would pay for the stone and timber? A vocal group, led by a pragmatic farmer, argued that the whole idea was pure pretension. "We are simple folk," he declared, "and our comfort is found in our own smiles and the local inn. A special house for thinking grand thoughts is not our way." The risk was clear. A failed project would be a monument to foolish ambition, a place everyone would pointedly avoid. But a successful retreat could offer something the Shire had never consciously cultivated, a space for spiritual deepening that would enrich their culture for centuries. A small band of friends, united by this shared vision, decided to act. They were a gardener, a carpenter, a brewer, and a scholar, and they pooled their modest savings not for profit, but for purpose. They scouted the far reaches of the White Downs until they found a small, secluded valley where a cheerful stream chattered over smooth stones and ancient beech trees offered a protective canopy. Their lodge would not be grand. It was a single, long building with a turf roof and large round windows looking into the heart of the wood. They used local stone and timber, and every detail was chosen for comfort and harmony with the land. The hearth was the centerpiece, and the larder was always stocked with simple, good food from their own gardens. They called it simply the Quiet Lodge. When the first visitors arrived, hesitant and unsure of what to expect, they found not a place for lofty speeches, but for warm silence and easy companionship. In the firelit common room, with the scent of pine and baking bread in the air, new ideas were quietly born and old friendships rediscovered. The lodge became a crucible for the Shire's gentle evolution, a testament that even the most contented heart sometimes needs a space to listen to the whispers of the world. That shadow finally reached the Shire, not as an army, but as a creeping dread. Whispers of a distant, rising shadow in the east, a nameless fear that choked the light from far-off kingdoms, began to seep into the edges of their awareness. It arrived with the grim faces of passing rangers and the unsettling silence of the birds. A cold wind seemed to blow from beyond the borders, carrying not a storm, but a profound disquiet that settled in the heart of every hobbit. It was a fear that whispered of endings, of a darkness so vast it could swallow even their quiet corner of the world. The immediate reaction was a deep, instinctual retreat. Round green doors were locked at night, a thing once unheard of. Cheerful gatherings at the Green Dragon grew sparse, and the laughter there felt forced, thin against the weight of the unknown. Some families, their eyes wide with a terror they could not name, began to speak of hiding, of sealing themselves in their deepest pantries, and waiting for a storm they could not see to pass them by. The very foundations of their society, built on trust and open doors, trembled. The stakes were absolute. To surrender to this fear was to let the shadow win without a single sword being drawn, to allow the essence of the Shire, its fellowship, its joy, its trust, to wither from within. But to stand against an enemy you could not fight, a darkness that was more a feeling than a foe, required a different kind of strength. It was then that the lessons of 1,000 quiet evenings on the gaffer's bench, the memory of Bullroarer's defiant laugh, and the stubborn resilience forged in the long winter began to stir. The mayor, his face lined with a new worry, did not call for weapons. He called for a meeting under the party tree, its leaves trembling in the unnerving breeze. He stood before his people and spoke not of the shadow, but of the light they themselves carried. He reminded them of the great water clean up and how they had healed their river together. He spoke of the 3 Farthing stone and how their unity was carved into its very face. We cannot fight this fear with swords, he said, his voice steady. But we can drown its whispers with our own voices. We can answer its chill with the warmth of our own hearths. We will not hide, we will shine. His words were the spark. That very night, a remarkable thing happened. Hobbits up and down the lane, from Hobbiton to Bywater, made a conscious choice. They unlocked their doors. They did more than that. They threw them wide open. Every window was lit, not with a single candle, but with every lantern and lamp they possessed, pushing back against the gloom. From the great smiles of Tuck Burrow to the smallest burrow in the Marish, a constellation of defiant light began to glow across the hills. The sound of music, hesitant at first, then growing in confidence, spilled from the open doors of the Ivy Bush Inn. Families who had been huddled in isolated worry walked out into the lanes and toward the light and the song. They gathered in each other's smiles, not to hide, but to be together. They shared their last, best preserves, not from a fear of shortage, but as an act of generous faith. They told the old stories, the tales of the long winter and the Battle of Greenfields, not as entertainment, but as a reminder of who they were and what they had already overcome. The shadow of fear found no purchase here. It could not penetrate the light of 1,000 hobbit holes, or the sound of a community singing their favorite drinking songs with a fierce, joyful determination. It could not thrive where neighbors checked on one another with a fresh baked pie, or where faunts were allowed to play outside again, their laughter a potent weapon against the silence. The hobbits faced their greatest test, not with violence, but with an overwhelming, stubborn display of everything the shadow sought to destroy. They reaffirmed their values by living them more fully and bravely than ever before. In doing so, they proved that the deepest magic in the Shire was not in the Malorn's light or the Ranger's vigilance, but in the simple, unbreakable strength of a community's heart, a force that no shadow, no matter how vast, could ever truly extinguish. And so the shadow passed, leaving not ruin in its wake, but a profound and quiet wisdom. The hobbits, having faced the deepest of fears not with steel, but with the unyielding light of their own community, emerged with a newfound understanding of their place in the world. They cherished their peace all the more fiercely, for they now knew it was not a gift of chance, but a legacy earned and actively protected. Their round green doors remained open, but their hearts held a gentle awareness of the vast tapestry beyond the Brandywine, a world of both peril and wonder to which they were now forever connected. The Shire was no longer an isolated paradise, but a sanctuary, a beacon of simple joys and steadfast courage in a wider, often troubled world. The young hobbit beside Bilbo let out a soft, contented sigh, his head nodding gently. The old stories of marching feet and golden wood, of silent rangers and defiant lanterns, had woven themselves into his dreams. Bilbo finished his tale, his own voice a low and comforting rumble in the quiet evening. He watched as his young friend's breathing deepened, slipping into a peaceful and untroubled sleep, a faint smile touching the corners of his mouth. In that quiet smile, with the fire crackling low and the scent of pipe weed lingering in the air, the enduring image of the Shire settled over them both, a land of warm hearths and lush gardens, of hidden strengths and quiet laughter, a testament to the everlasting hope that sleeps under the gentle watch of the stars.